had people jump in my truck before, and not knowing what they wanted, they just opened up the truck door and got in, looking at him like, "Are you crazy or something?" And I just felt it was time to start carrying a weapon.
When he arrived at his wife's house, he met with a nasty surprise. In the bedroom, Gloria was having sex with one party guest, whilst he was taunted by the other guests in the house.
I don't think any man would sit there and just took what I took. And I said, "Look, I don't want to have to be here. You know this ain't right." I whipped out my deer rifle and I went into the house. And the intentions of going in the house was not to hurt anyone. The intentions was just to, if anything, just to bolster the gun, wave it around, and just get out of there.
Then one of Gloria's friends threw beer at Westbrook, and the others laughed.
When she threw the beer in my face, and that's when the shooting started going down. From that point on, I didn't even know if I was going to hit them. I mean, it just happened. It all went down within just a matter of seconds.
Westbrook killed the 3 people in the lounge, then walked to the bedroom where his wife was having sex with another man.
They were still in there having sex. And I mean, I'm sitting there looking at this and I'm going, this is crazy. I was just totally hacked off. I wasn't myself.
You're an explosive man.
Right. I mean, from that point on, all I could see was red from that point on. And she had pushed Mr. Haslip off of her, and I shot across the bed, and I thought that I hit him. The person that ended up getting hit was her.
When Westbrook stopped shooting, all 5 people in the house were dead.
But you yourself had no previous record with the law?
No. I'm as white as this uniform. I'm clean. I wasn't taking dead aim at these people. The prosecution tried to play it out as I just went in there and massacred these people. That is not what happened at all. It was plain to see what went on there. It was a man who just had enough, who was driven to a point that he went over the edge and he just blew 5 people away.
Now that you've had all these years to think about the situation, have you been able to feel some remorse?
Well, at the time, no, I didn't have any remorse for him. I mean, who would have? I mean, it's nothing to brag about. It's quite sad, and I cry about it a lot. I regret it ever happened. I still miss my wife to this very day. Sometimes I just wish I was God and I could just bring them all back, And then there's other times when I just pray that this will finally come to a heaping end and, there'll be light at the end of the tunnel for me.
For his crimes, Coy Westbrook was sentenced to death. A date has not yet been set for his execution. Dr. Stone considers Westbrook, his crimes, and his desire for revenge.
All of us, at one time or another, feel the need for revenge. For most, however, it remains an idle fantasy. Our sense of morality prevents us from acting in a lethal manner. But Westbrook's prolonged exposure to humiliation, coupled with his wife's flagrant infidelity, overwhelmed his sense of right or wrong. He reveals a great deal about the lethal implications the need for revenge can unleash.
Dr. Stone places Westbrook at level 6 on his scale, the category reserved for impetuous, hot-headed murderers who kill impulsively. To Stone, he is a clear example of what people are capable of when overcome by rage. Coy Wayne Westbrook's emotions overcame his sense of right and wrong, provoking rage and multiple murder. By contrast, some murderers commit their acts because others control them. Dr. Stone went to Ross Correctional Institution in Ohio, to interview Ron Luff, a former follower of cult leader Jeff Lundgren. Lundgren was the head of a small splinter sect of Mormons. In 1989, Lundgren discovered that cult member Dennis Avery had failed to turn over all of his assets to the cult's group fund. He instructed Ron Luff to bring Avery, his wife, and 3 daughters to a barn.
He says, I want them brought out to the barn from oldest to youngest, and I was the one that brought them out.
As Luff brought them out, Lundgren killed them, one by one. Prior to the slaughter, Luff had no criminal background or history of violence. He was a husband and father, and was devoutly religious.
It is shocking to see someone like Ron Luff play a role in a murder. Up until the time of the crime, his life gave no indication that he was capable of such a heinous act. History is filled, however, with people who, on the surface, would seem incapable of involvement in extreme violence and murder, yet who commit these acts without hesitation. I hope that by speaking with Mr. Luff, I can get greater insight into how certain people suppress their own moral values under the influence of another. Ultimately, Jeff came to have a power over his group, including yourself, I gather. How did he exercise that power?
Well, it was basically by our conclusion, in as much as his enforcement of this conclusion, that he was the choice seer. Quite frankly, due to my perception of what this church was about, I really didn't know that the world was going to be around that much longer. You know, Latter-day Saints implies the world's coming to an end. And he was called the choice seer because he would bring this earth to a close.
In 1987, Ron Luff was a devout Mormon. Convinced that Lundgren was a true prophet, he left his job and moved with his wife and children to join Lundgren's splinter group.
We're supposed to move out on faith. And according to what others had said that had moved up there, they had done the same thing. And so I did this. And I remember my hand shaking when I wrote a letter of resignation to the plant where I worked in Missouri and gave them my 2 weeks' notice. I wasn't aware that there was a group or a cult or anything like that. I had no knowledge whatsoever about what cults were. But these were people who seemed sure of where they were and why they were there. We were eventually persuaded to cut off communications from the outside, family members, friends. It's like the windows are nailed shut and there's no fresh air allowed in the room. And you live in that environment day in and day out. Personally, I think that Lundgren had a fascination with murder. Ultimately, he wanted to experience killing somebody.
When he caught you up in it, what was your own thought process as it was beginning to happen?
I felt duty-bound as someone who has to carry out some judgment. God had become that quaking mountain, that fiery mountain kind of God, and he had strict demands.
What were some of your thoughts, if you allowed yourself any thoughts, as you were carrying this family one by one out to the barn?
Allowed any thoughts?
I'm sorry?
Well, you said, or if I allowed myself any thoughts.
Yeah.
That's been an issue that people said, well, didn't you know this was going to happen? Well, it's impossible for you to determine what God is going to mandate from you, especially in this so-called sacred moment, as this was supposed to have been, where you're doing this terrible thing under the guise of God's authority. That would have been sin for me to think that I knew what he was going to do once they were inside.
Wait a second. It would have been sin for you to know that he was going to shoot them? Why?
Because it wasn't for me to determine what their fate was.
Yeah, but if you felt that their killing was righteous, then it wasn't a sin.
No, the sin was not in whether or not they would die. The sin was in my thinking I would know what would happen. He could extend them grace and not have them killed.
Certainly after he shot the first one, there must have been some part of your mind that knew that the other 4 were going to meet a similar fate.
Why?
Well, because that's where the smart money was. If you
That's thinking outside the box.
But not far out the box.
There's a huge box. I remember when I got to Lucasville and I was in maximum security penitentiary and I was talking to one of the COs and he says, what's it like to be brainwashed? And I said, far more confining than this place. And I meant it. When you can't think outside that box, that's